morning and welcome back to Sherburne Public Library's Book Talk. Today we are doing classic literature. So we picked out some of our favorite classic literature books and we're going to talk about them. So Megan, I think you're going first.
Yep. So mine is The Face on the Milk Carton by Caroline Cooney. That's actually the author that I talked about last week in our new, what was it, Mysteries? Yes. That was her first adult book. So she mostly has done YA books, and they're usually more mystery thriller type books. And that's what this one is. So this is actually the first in a series of, I think it's 5 books. I was kind of obsessed with these books when I was in middle school. It was just like the first mystery books that I kind of got into that felt sort of like you were reading something older, I guess, than a children's book. So basically, I guess I'll start out by saying, because I don't know if people younger than me know this, in the 80s and 90s, they used to put missing children, their pictures and information on milk cartons to try to get the word out. That was before we had like Amber Alerts and cell phones and all that. So basically this book is about a girl named Janie who is having lunch at school. I think she's a teenager, and she sees on a milk carton, she sees herself basically as a toddler, and she's pretty sure that it's her. And so she is very confused. She goes home and talks to her parents and says, like, what's going on here? And she ends up going in the attic and finding some things that are confusing that have the name Hannah on them. So she talks to her parents, and basically they tell her that she is actually their granddaughter, and their daughter Hannah had joined a cult years ago and then had come back to see them and had brought her 3-year-old daughter, who is Janie, and left her with them. So they have been raising her as their own, but she is their granddaughter. But that, so they are, that's the story they know. But obviously now they're kind of confused because she's on a milk carton. So they're wondering, maybe their daughter didn't tell them the truth and maybe she was kidnapped. I don't really want to tell too much beyond that, but there, like I said, there are 5 books, and this is the first one. And it kind of goes through the process of her figuring out like what happened here. She starts to have these flashbacks to her childhood, and she's trying to figure out exactly what the story is here, because clearly her parents' story is not lining up with what she's figuring out. It's really good. It was challenged a lot when it first came out for dealing with kidnapping, cults, anything you can think of. Defying authority, I think, was one of them. So, but I know that it was really popular. I think we read it as a class in middle school. So it has been used in classrooms and stuff. It's really interesting. And like I said, I feel like it's, for a lot of kids, it's sort of that first mystery thriller that they maybe have read, that it's not really what you're used to in at that age for literature. So I recommend it.
I've actually never read those. I'm sorry, Marie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, through that whole thing, I was like, why do I feel like I know exactly what this book is? Because I don't think I've read it. And then once you said, like reading it in middle school, I was like, we read that.
Yeah.
We read that in middle school. I read that in 7th grade, and I honestly I didn't remember. We read it as a class, and I was like, wasn't she kidnapped? Like, I thought that's what happened.
Yeah.
And then you were like, there was this whole weird, and I was like, right. But yeah, no, I definitely remember reading that in 7th grade and having that same experience of like, this is the first really cool like mystery book that I've read. And our teacher, oh geez, I blocked most of middle school out of my head, which I think is why I didn't remember reading this. But I don't remember my teacher's name, but he had to explain to us the whole concept of milk carton kids, like what they were, and like, because I am younger than you, so it's like
Yeah.
I was in middle school in like the 2010s. So
So, what year was this written,
So
Megan? Do
this
you
is
know?
from 1990.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and
That
I
explains why
looked,
I
and
didn't read it.
I think they stopped putting the kids on the milk cartons when we started with Amber Alerts, which was like 95 or 96.
I would guess
So
that,
I think there's a
yeah.
lot of people that don't really realize that they used to do that.
Right. I, of course, remember that because, yeah, I was alive during that time period. I was in high school and college at that time. And I remember that a lot. And because I think, didn't they start doing that because of that one kid
Yeah, I know who
that
you're talking
I
about.
can't think of his name,
I
but
can't either.
his father was John something, and he used to have that TV show afterward, which was looking for lost children,
Yeah.
basically. Um, and I think that was the start of it, I think. But that was always interesting. And it's funny because I hadn't really thought about it until you said it, that, a lot of young people would not know that,
Yeah.
that was what was happening, because, yeah, so I've not read it because I was past that age group, I guess, when, obviously when it came out. So, but that sounds really good. So is it based on a real story, or is it just, it's fiction,
No, it's not. It's not. But
but
yeah,
well done, seeming like
yeah, and
real kind of
it's a
thing?
really good series. And there is a movie with Kelly
Yeah.
Martin from like the
Okay.
mid 90s.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all coming back to me now.
Yeah.
So this is good for middle school and
Yeah.
up, basically.
Yep.
Sounds like. So that's great. Good. And you guys read it in school. That's, to me, sometimes that is, um, so many classics are required in school, and that, right there, oh, it must be a classic. Thanks. No, that's great. So I'm gonna go next. I'm reviewing Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This, I also had to read this in high school. Maybe you guys did too. I don't know. But it made a huge impression on me in high school. We did a whole uh, series or group of books that were dystopian, utopian, futuristic type books when I was in high school, and I loved it. I read this. We read some other Lost Horizon. I don't think we read 1984. I read that later in my life, after high school and college or something. But anyway, Brave New World, it's a dystopian science fiction, basically, novel. And it was written in 1930. Well, it's 31 he wrote it. It's published in 32. So for its time, it was really weird and forward thinking, because it describes a society where we don't, they, first of all, babies are made in test tubes. There is no more giving birth. There's no mother and father. Those are words that you never use. They're horrible, like profanity even to say those things. And they are from the time they are embryos until they are, well, everybody is under control, kind of the government, mind control in a way. They brainwash them with that books are bad and they shouldn't read and they don't like art, and they're only being raised to be workers, and they're put in different castes. So there's the alphas, the gammas, the deltas, and the epsilons, and they all, are for different purposes within society. So you know, it's futuristic, but in some ways, you can, as you read it, and I've reread it many times in my life, you can see things that have happened or are happening in our world that kind of tie into that. It's very, in some ways it was kind of prophetic, the way it was written, because it's like, oh, some of these things are happening. This, you know, some people call socialism, or control of the workers and things like that. I guess that's more communism, but so it deals with a character named Bernard Marx. They all have interesting names like that. So Bernard is just a worker. He's a psychologist or psychiatrist, psychologist. he's starting not to believe in what's happening, and he um, starts dating. I call it dating. It's weird. Their idea of sex is kind of weird, because now sex is not for anything other than just pure pleasure. So when they hook up with somebody, it's, that's just a normal thing. You expect that you're going to have sex with everyone. It's kind of weird. Um, anyway, they start dating, or whatever you want to call it, and they take a holiday and they go out to this place. It's called the Savage Reservation, and these are people who were actually born, and so they're outcasts in society, and they don't want them anywhere near everything else. But he ends up dealing with this one savage that they call John, and he somehow works it out that he brings John back into society, where he is, into his city, and so that becomes a whole crazy thing because of their differences and how they were raised, and everything. It's a wild ride. Um, the other thing I didn't talk about is they do, like I said, they kind of brainwash them. They do sleep learning, which at the time I guess they thought was could be something you could do. So they teach, they do these where they sleep at night and they fill their heads with mantras over and over of, like, books are bad, or art is terrible, things like that. And the other thing that I didn't talk about was the fact that they keep everybody happy by giving them what they call soma, which is a happy pill, basically. And it just keeps you mellow and happy and even. So you don't question life, you don't question things, there's no deep thinking. It's just you go through your life doing your job in the society caste that you were in, the level of society. So it's a really, really cool take, I think, on dystopian society, and I was fascinated with it, and I think that, to me, that kind of has led me to enjoying things like the Hunger Games and Divergent, and it's all in that same kind of a vein. Of course, it's written in 1932, so it has a little different feel to it, and then some of it's kind of dated and you're like, what? But you just keep going with it, and you realize that it's, very similar to the stuff that we're reading now. And the title was taken, which I love, from a Shakespeare play, from The Tempest. Oh, wonder how many goodly creatures are there here, how beauteous mankind is, oh brave new world that has such people in it. So that's where it comes from. So I recommend it. I read it in high school. Like I said, it was required reading. Some people hated it because they didn't like reading this kind of novel, but I loved it. And I loved learning about this kind of futuristic. It was like taking my brain suddenly and making me look at the world in a different way, And so for me, that was a great thing, because I hadn't thought about that before. I hadn't thought about anything other than the way I was living in my life. So it opened my mind up a little, which is what books should do, right? So I recommend.
It reminds me of, it sounds like sort of, I think it would be probably really popular now because of, I think of like Handmaid's Tale and all of what you said, Hunger Games, Divergent, all those that have been really popular in the past several years.
Right.
And I bet a lot of people haven't read that one though. So
yeah, I know a lot of people with, things that have been happening in our society over the last, I don't know, 10 or 20 years even. A lot of people have gone back to Brave New World in 1984 and reread them, because some of the things that are in it are kind of almost timely, and it's just kind of eerie and weird. It's almost it's almost like he predicted some things. It was really interesting. And Aldous Huxley and he was inspired by H.G. Wells' 1984, and I don't know if they knew each other, but he had written a letter to him. He told him how inspired his book was. They had different takes. Like Wells had like a hopeful vision of the future. This one is not as hopeful. It's not as bright and cheery in the end. It's kind of sad and depressing, honestly. But I mean, the things, the elements of it have a lot of tiebacks to things that have happened in our recent history. So it's interesting. So I recommend it for that reason, honestly. And it's classic. Everyone should read it. All right, Marie, would you like to tell us about your book?
Yes, I would. So my book that I chose, I am a kind of a classic literature person in general, but one specific genre of classic literature, which is classic literature written by women. So the book I chose is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. If anybody knows me, they know this is one of my absolute favorites. This is one of my absolute favorite books. And I like to think of myself as a modern Jo March. But anyway, so this book follows the story of a girl named Jo March and her three sisters. There we go. I know, I can't, wow. Of her and her three sisters. And they just, it's just kind of about everyday life and them living their lives during the Civil War. They live in Massachusetts, specifically Concord, Massachusetts. I've been there. I've visited the Louisa May Alcott house because I'm a huge history person as well. Very cool museum. I highly recommend going if you ever have a chance. But it just kind of follows their everyday life. And it starts with Jo as a younger woman who is just kind of trying to be herself in a society that regards women in a very specific way. And Jo doesn't really fit that mold. Louisa May Alcott kind of describes Jo as being like skinny, freckled, mousy brown hair, like tall. She has tan skin, which at this time period, women were not supposed to be that way. They were supposed to be pale and blonde haired and like her sister Amy, who was like the perfect, Amy's terrible, but the perfect child, like she's the perfect woman. But all four of the sisters go through their own separate journeys, which I think is one of the really amazing things of this book. Jo deals with sexism. Meg deals with her own sort of sexism in a way where Jo has this specific idea that all of the sisters need to stay together, but Meg really wants to go and marry this man who she loves so much and like have children, and like that's the life she wants to live. And then Beth, who Beth is the very quiet one and she likes to play piano, and eventually Beth comes down with scarlet fever because there was a scarlet fever outbreak at that time in history in the United States. And so Beth has to deal with having an illness like that. And then, of course, Amy, who is the youngest child, goes through, we see her journey through school and how she's treated at school, and how she grows up, basically. And then she goes away to Europe for a while, and it's just having four different perspectives on what life could look like for women in a historic setting, I think is one of my favorite things about this book in general. And also the fact that the main character is like stomping on the patriarchy. Like, I love that. So Jo, specifically, one of the ways that she likes to stomp on the patriarchy, as I put it, is she's a writer. And usually at this time, women were not supposed to be writers. So Jo, throughout most of the book, is trying to publish her own novel. And she has a lot of trouble with this because she's a woman. And most of the publishers say to her, no, you're a woman. This isn't something that our readers would want to read. And, it's frivolous and it's not something that people would want to read. And so she ends up moving away from home. She moves to New York City to get closer to the publishing house and devote more of her time to writing and just live on her own. And she's a governess where she works at like a school, a boarding school, Mrs. Kirk's boarding school to be exact. And she meets a man named Professor Bear, who like shows her parts of culture that she had never really had the opportunity to see before. Like he takes her to see a Shakespeare play, and he takes her to like different restaurants in New York, and he just, you know, he shows her that side of life that she hasn't really been able to see before, living at home with all of her family in Concord, Massachusetts. But unfortunately, Joe has to go back home because of Beth getting scarlet fever, as I mentioned previously. But anyway, so this book, I feel like, is an absolute true classic. And this is a book that everyone should read. I don't care who you are. Everybody should read this book. I read this book usually at least once a year, if I can, if I have the time, because this is also just a giant version because this is the annotated version. And it has beautiful illustrations in it. We do have this copy at the library. If you ever want to check it out, take a look at it. Kathleen bought it a few years ago. But it's not an overly long book, so I try to read it at least once a year if I can. And there are also like a lot of cool like BBC adaptations. There's a musical, there's movie adaptations that are really good. And this is, you know, if you haven't read this book already, this is a story of strong women that everybody should read. I argue. So
I agree. Little Women is one of my favorite novels too, honestly. I've reread that one many, many times, and I've directed it as a play a couple times. It's just beautiful. I was always taken in by just the feel of the family together. They were such a loving family and really cared about each other. Even when they argued and fought and hated each other at certain points, it's like a family. You do that. But it's just, that was the thing that always struck me, is how it was just beautiful, the way they were just so together. And I think it's interesting because, you know, when I read it, so many years ago, I didn't get, of course, all of the modern feminist feel about it. I thought it was kind of not that way, honestly. But the more that I read it and see it now, and see it in, you know, because every time you read it, you know, your life is in a different point and you look at things a little differently. And it's like, yeah, I get that now. I mean, obviously Jo has always been kind of a rebel, in the sense that she was a writer, first of all, like you said, which was so not, you know, accepted by society. And they put on plays. I mean, I loved that part of it. You know, she would write plays, and they would all be characters in it. It reminded me of my own self. And when I was growing up, I didn't write them, but I directed them. I made sure that my family was involved, you know. That was just, so I could always relate to that part of it.
I think I saw the movie before I read it. I know I did. And so I grew up, we always watched the Winona Ryder version.
yeah,
Was
that's
the
what I
one
think.
Yeah, me
Susan
too.
Sarandon,
Yeah.
all the, to me, that's my favorite version because that's what I grew up watching. But
It is for me too, but
yeah.
I do appreciate the newer one. I mean, because it really does do, like what Marie is saying, you really see the I don't know, the women for their own person and their struggles, and you understand from their point of view what they were going through.
It's a really beautiful version of it, I think. Just for cinematography's sake, it's absolutely gorgeous. But Greta Gerwig is such a wonderful director.
Yeah.
And it's a great version. There's also a really, really good BBC version that I think everybody should watch. It's a 4-part miniseries.
Okay.
And Maya Hawke is in it. So, and if anybody knows her, she's in what's the show that everybody loves so much that's science fiction? Stranger Things. She was in a season of Stranger Things for a little while.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a really good version. And of course, the Winona Ryder version, absolute classic.
I love that one.
Yeah, very good. I was also in a version of Little Women my senior year of high
Yes,
school.
you were.
This is honestly where my obsession started, because I mean, I've always known about this book because my mom is an English teacher, and she like tried to make me read it several times. And whenever somebody tries to make me read something, I, out of spite, just go, no. Uh, but I had read it before, like being in the musical, but my true obsession with it came from being in the musical and getting to be Jo, like
Yeah,
taking on her persona and being able to be Jo was just like, wow, I am her. Like, what's going on?
it's true. But and I was also thinking, I watch Dickinson
Yeah,
on Apple TV, and there's so many parallels to the fact that she's a writer, and it's not proper for her to be a writer in her time period, and Emily Dickinson. And so it made me think of that
yeah.
when you
Well, and
said that.
I think there's definitely the reason why I gravitate more towards women writers in classic literature in general is exactly what you're saying. It's like, because I'm a history person. So the history of that in general is just fascinating to me, of like the struggle that the Brontes went through to get any of their stuff published, the fact that they had to publish under fake names. And like there's so many wonderful books that we have that we don't realize were actually written by women because they're still published to this day under pseudonyms. For example, like Middlemarch is a very famous classic book written by George Eliot. George Eliot was actually a woman who published under the name of George Eliot. I don't remember her name right now, but it's very common. And I'm sure there are so many other books that like we think are written by men, but were not.
Right.
So I love that history. And the fact that Louisa May Alcott was able to publish this book not under a pseudonym also, I think, is a testament to her strength and fortitude. Because when I went to the museum, they were telling us about the publishing process of the book. And she tried for years, literally years, to get this book published. And it was hard for her because she didn't do what Jo did, where she went to New York and annoyed publishers until they published her book. She had to do it from home at Concord. She never left. And also the other thing is this book is loosely based on Louisa May Alcott's family and life and everything.
Right.
So there's that. But yeah, it's a good taste of history, I think.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. We have some really interesting novels here. So, of course, we at the library have many, many classics. They're in a separate section. So if you come in looking for something classic, you'll just ask at the desk, or we can point you toward the classic section. You can browse to your heart's content. So thanks for coming. Next week, we're going to be doing new movies, new DVDs. So you'll want to join us for that. And I guess I will see you at the library. Thanks for listening. Bye.